Today, we have asked you to gather as we announce the addition of 13 groups to the list of terrorist entities included in the Criminal Code.
Canada has officially declared the Proud Boys a terrorist organization. Now, I'm going to discuss what the Proud Boys are, what this means, and also some pushback, not from the Proud Boys, but from people that are worried of about what this could mean for people of color and organizations that have already been targeted. So I'm going to get into all of that. Let me first start here with, of course, what the Proud Boys are. This from CTV News. Started by Canadian and former Vice Media co-founder Gavin McGuinness, the Proud Boys are a far-right organization that prides itself on neo-chauvinism and their core belief in anti-political correctness. Although the group has denied any affiliation with far-right rhetoric in the past, it has been increasingly violent in the wake of Donald Trump's election in 2016. There are chapters of the group across Canada, and according to the government's description of the organization published on Wednesday, quote, members of the group espouse misogynistic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, and or white supremacist ideologies and associate with white supremacist groups. So there is no denying here that the Proud Boys are a hate group, a white supremacist group. And law enforcement have been looking into the Proud Boys for a while for this consideration. This isn't just a reaction to what happened in the insurrection, which of course the Proud Boys played a part in on the Capitol. So this isn't just a response to that. This has been going on. The investigations have been going on for a while into the Proud Boys. Now let me tell you exactly what this means for the organization. The decision also brings a range of legal and financial implications for people participating in or who are otherwise affiliated with these groups. Specifically, the Criminal Code includes charges for people or organizations that deal with property or finances of a listed entity. It also criminalizes certain supporting activities, such as training and recruitment. For example, purchasing Proud Boys merchandise from the group could now be considered a criminal act in this country. Further, anyone looking to enter Canada may not be allowed in if they are found to be associated with the listed group, and Blair can revoke the passports of anyone deemed to pose a threat to travel to engage in terrorist activities. In line with the new label as terrorist entities, steps are also being taken to remove any online content from these entities. So, wide range of actions here. I would say that the most devastating of which to this group, of course, being financially, their inability to operate as they currently do, and also taking steps here to remove online content from these groups. Now, let me show you here a little pushback. Now, this is from somebody, Harsha Walia here, who has a article here I will link to below the video that goes a lot more in depth. I'll get a quote from this as well in a bit. But somebody here who is worried, not about the Proud Boys, but about how the terrorist designation has been used and continues to be used. So she tweets out here, unpopular opinion, but being connected to many people impacted by terrorist designation, let me be clear that calling for its expansion to white supremacists won't work. It is fundamentally regressive law and targets Black, Indigenous, Muslim, Sikh, left communities by design. War on terror has been one of linguistic and legal contortions that, by design, allow state to fortify policing and surveillance powers. More of war on crime or more of war on terror will not end fascism or white nationalism. It will only fuel it and target more oppressed people. Now, I'm not presenting this argument because I agree with it or disagree with it. I'm not an expert in this field, but it is worth at least exploring some of these ideas and the pushback to this. So she goes on here in this piece to say, for starters, should not be the mere fact that white supremacist groups are literal Nazis and open fascists be enough to mobilize us into action? Why can't we designate them as white supremacist organizations and take action accordingly? Going on here to say, the most glaring example of this fundamentally oppressive system is the state violence of deportation. For the past 2 decades, Canada has increasingly used non-existent and secret evidence against people, especially against Muslims, Arabs, Kurds, and Sikhs, as well as left organizations such as PFLP or FMLN. Migrants, refugees, and permanent residents are routinely being labeled as terrorist or accused of being affiliated with terrorist entities in order to escalate their stigmatization, criminalization, detention, and deportation. So the issue here that Harsha Walia has, it appears to be with this terrorist designation, is more about how that terrorist designation is used. As she says here, why not just label them as white supremacist organizations and act accordingly? So again, I don't honestly know enough to really give you a real assessment of the worries that she has here. But this is somebody who is well read, well versed in this field, and if you want to read more about this, I'll link to her article below the video. But just as you know, I'm also going to be fair here and push back a little bit, as this isn't new. In 2019, for the first time, Canada added white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups to its terrorist organization list. So any potential impact from adding a white supremacist group to this terrorist list, I assume would have been felt over these past 2 years, and maybe it has been felt. I just don't know of it, but this is nothing new here. So adding the Proud Boys to the list, they aren't changing the rules around who can and can't be added to the list. It's already been done. And let me also give you here just what Public Safety Minister Bill Blair said about this.
I'll repeat, this is not about politics. It's not about infringing upon freedom of belief, association, or freedom of speech. It is about controlling the violent activities of ideologically motivated extremism. Each one of the newly listed groups announced today meets that criteria. It's also important to note that there are several safeguards built into the listing regime to ensure that the system remains balanced, fair, and meets the appropriate legal threshold. Any listed entity may request for its removal from the list, and if that removal is not granted, the Criminal Code allows for a review of the decision by the federal court. The entire list must be reviewed every 5 years to ensure that each entity continues to merit its inclusion.
So there are safeguards in place. The ability for these organizations to request removal from the list, and for that to be analyzed and potentially be removed from the list if they shouldn't be on there. Now, again, of course, yes, it comes down to who is deciding that, and is that a fair process. But still, these safeguards are in place. Also, the analysis of every 5 years, looking at the list and ensuring that who's on the list should be on the list. So there are those safeguards in place. Of course, not a perfect system, but there are attempts here to at least make this a fair process. Also, there was a reaction to these worries from the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, who tweeted out saying, "We have previously expressed concern that the definition of a terrorist entity would have to change or the bar be lowered to list the Proud Boys on the basis that a loosened definition could be exploited to target Black, Indigenous people of color, or anti-racist groups in the future." This morning, Minister Blair called on us about the upcoming announcement, and in part to address that concern. He told us that, based on the information they have, the Proud Boys more than meet the criteria to be designated a terrorist entity. So again, there were no rules changed to put the Proud Boys on the list. They just already met the criteria to be designated as a terrorist organization. Now, ultimately, I see this as a positive step, but of course, I think it's fair to listen to the concerns of others. I will link to this below the video if you want to read more into that perspective as well. But this is something that I don't think there's no real, right or wrong here in terms of, there is right or wrong in terms of the group and what the group represents. But in terms of how the system currently operates, yes, I imagine there are serious and legitimate concerns there. And I agree that why not just label them a white supremacist organization, and that should be enough. But at the same time, the steps taken to limit the group's ability to grow, I think, clearly are positive.